Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones. The unvisited ones. The cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. So I thought we might try something a little different with this solo show, and that's to go over a ritual procedure, I guess, or a structure that may be useful to some of you. Sort of based on a bit of experience, and I wasn't sure where I was going to put this because I needed to kind of cohere it into a sequence for myself anyway, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go. And I thought, actually, I'll just do it as a solo show. Might be useful for people. So we're talking about a ritual procedure for approaching the mushroom as, what I think she is, a vastly ancient alien intelligence exploring the cosmos by interacting with various nervous systems along the way. But the show isn't just about mushrooms. You can also think of it as an example to think with of almost a universal framework for a sort of, animist extra-dimensional diplomacy, if you will. But we should probably get the legal stuff out of the way first, which is this episode goes out to the handful of listeners that live in jurisdictions where psilocybin is legal only. Good. So that's that done. And I guess I want to break it down into sections. So the first section is sort of the before, and then we'll move into the kind of the day of, and then immediately before, and then during, and then after. So before, and this is worth thinking about in a wider context than how and why to do mushrooms. It's my observation, we have a tendency in the magical world to over-ritualize things that, as far as I can tell, emerges from a sort of unexamined dualism that suggests matter is either empty or dead until we put like a ghost or a spirit or something in it. And I base this on having had fielded a number of questions in the live Q&As amongst the premium members, asking about, well, what do you think of this as a ritual procedure for something that I think doesn't require all that extra material? In that Terence sense of if it's real, it can take the pressure. The metaphysics we're working towards here allows for personhood and agency, again, to be extended beyond the human. So if the mushroom is there, the mushroom is there. And so I want you to have a good look at your own tendency if it's there to do that, and see if I'm right, that there's an unexamined dualism or almost an anxiety that this stuff doesn't have the level of reality, or you don't think it has a level of reality that maybe it does, right? So, and again, this is very Terence. You don't need to, get the circle out and pray and all that kind of stuff beforehand. And you can always modify it, but maybe do it without at least once. I think Terence was right about that. You're essentially dancing with the mushroom. And if the mushroom is there and it is what it is, you don't need to do that stuff. And also, I guess, from a post-colonial perspective, just based on what I know of the demography of the show, you are extremely unlikely to have legitimate access to, I guess, the ritual context the mushroom has historically enjoyed. But I mean, from a politeness perspective alone, that suggests you should let the mushroom take the lead and approach it as a person with its own agency. So doubling down on the extra-dimensional diplomacy metaphor, if you are inviting the Japanese ambassador to a function, you don't pretend to be Japanese. You just try to not be a dick. You just try to be respectful, right? That said, what that not be a dick universal respectfulness looks like could be considered, it could be that there are a few super wide ritual universals that I certainly use, that I'll just, describe now. And I guess these emerge from a more embodied perspective, perhaps. And obviously place being the first one, so location. Best case is to have somewhere indoor where you will be undisturbed, that is also nature adjacent. So rather than either or, if you have done this particular frustrating experience of, rolling around through YouTube looking for, what's the best place to do this? You'll have people who are camping. You'll have people who, got too high in their car in a park. And you just think this, you have all this time beforehand to work it out. And a case can be made if that's not your house. This is a good case for Airbnb, right? If you have enough time to think about it, and that sort of brings me to the next point, which is think about electing it astrologically. Because as a general rule, night or sunset are best, but that's not hard and fast, particularly if you want to enjoy the quote-unquote nature part later, the experience of, still having the psilocybin in your system and interacting with living systems is easier done simply in daylight. You can still do it at night, but that's what I mean by it's not hard and fast. Night or sunset is better from a quietness perspective and a darkness perspective. Terence and the 5 dried grams in silent darkness, right? But there are ways to synthesize darkness and silence, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's the first one the first two is place and time. So you see what I mean? There's super wide ritual universals that I don't think get in the way. And the next one is whether or not to select co-pilots. Terence, again, said he preferred to take mushrooms alone. And frankly, there's a lot to recommend that, even at a 5 dried gram dose and up. And if you're unfamiliar with it, start at 5 if you're doing it alone. But you actually can. And I would probably cap it at 1 extra person, although, again, not hard and fast. That's just how I do it. You actually can have an extra person as long as they're also committed to taking this particular process seriously. And in fact, so if you're doing an extremely high dose, having 4 people over 2 days can work, because you can have 2 journeying one day and 2 sitters, and then they switch for the next day, because sitting is boring. Simple as that. You don't want to be the only one not doing something. And that kind of works. But if you're going to do like really high doses, then that's an option. You see, we get back into Airbnb territory, but if you're electing it and so on, and you're going to take it seriously, that's how we do it. And that's sort of it in terms of the before stuff, although the day of does kind of bleed into it, which is the next section where we're going to talk about. And either before or the day of, decide what you're going to journey on. There are, I guess, 2 main options here, and a very good case can be made for either of them. A particular personal issue. First option. So a compulsive behavior or the source of certain feelings of inadequacy and so on. And here's where the elections come in. One, you can elect for actually that works quite well as a journeying experience from a timing perspective. But if there are particular transits through relevant houses in your chart, for instance, then this is an opportunity to explore them and kind of burn off the dross and end up with the medicine. Have a care to your own mental health. Don't if you're unfamiliar with mushrooms, decide to tackle a hugely traumatic event from your childhood or something on your own in an Airbnb in the woods. I think inadequacy or feelings of not good enoughness that are impacting work or relationships, those are better beginning areas, right? Don't try to fix yourself entirely with minimal experience with it. And the other one, and this is if you can't think about it or you're like, nah, I'm a bit wary of that, is you simply, once you've begun, you ask the mushroom what you most need to know or understand from a healing perspective right now. Now, that will always work. And we'll when we get to the actual during the journey part, I'll return to that, right? So this is day of stuff or before stuff. And then on the day of, like, the materia are actually simple because, again, I would like to see, if you're going to do this, a sort of minimized ritualism. So they're simple. So beyond, clearly sufficient dried weight of mushrooms, which again is a minimum of 5 grams per participant, you'll need a digital scale unless you want to do this bit beforehand, so you can precisely divide up the dose. You will need earplugs and an eye mask for each participant. I use eye masks from airline kits because we have loads of them. And you can buy 100 foam earplugs on Amazon for a few dollars. Now, if you are unfamiliar with sleeping with earplugs, it honestly only takes a couple of nights. And then, frankly, I'm a convert from having lived under the Heathrow flight path, even down here on a farm where it is silent. I still sleep with them. But if you're unfamiliar with them, it is worth trying them for a few nights just to familiarize yourself, because you don't want those sort of physical sensations getting in the way of the experience, right? Eye masks are what they are, but particularly if you're doing a daytime journey or even a sunset one, or even not, eye masks and earplugs, because 5 dried grams in silent darkness are what you want. Now, you'll also be wanting loose-fitting, clean, obviously, clothing. And if you're someone who gets cold, even in warmer climates, just remember you'll be lying quite still for a while. So think about that when you are selecting the clothing. So, most of you are heading into summer, which is going to be a better time to do this, particularly if you want to do the nature interaction part. So, fresh, clean, cheap sweats would be fine. Ideally you want natural materials, but that's not even mushroom specific. That's just the case. And at the very least, you may want to wear socks. Unless your feet get super hot or you find socks weird, you will be lying down, not moving. So if you're someone who gets cold, consider that. You will also very likely need freshly laundered sheets, as you will likely be doing the actual journeying part on a bed. Now, that's not hard and fast as well. Adjust accordingly if you're using, say, a yoga mat on the floor or something. It makes no difference. It's what you feel is appropriate for that. I use the bed, but then we have a Klingon firm mattress. So again, you just kind of want to be lying down and comfortable and not too cold and not too warm. The other thing you want to lay in before you start is fresh living foods, particularly fruit and yogurt. You will be disinclined to eat meat products and sometimes even dairy products. And buy the artificial snack stuff as well, because essentially once you're done with this, you are still kind of high. But this is something that Leary wrote about with regards to LSD that's absolutely on point and something I've been using since my first LSD experience as a teenager. Part of the alteration of your senses includes taste, obviously. And natural foods, particularly fresh fruits, taste incredible. And it's my experience with doing this with mushrooms that this is something the mushroom truly enjoys, because how else is it going to eat watermelon or blueberries and yogurt or whatever? It doesn't have a mouth or a tongue, right? So if the model suggests that this is an intelligence that interacts with your consciousness and nervous system for the joy of it and for the experience, and this is how it learns about the universe, then it loves this stuff. Lay in the snack foods, especially if you've got sitters. But you'll find even if you go to eat them, you're like, no, I'm not into that. I'm going back to the watermelon. And you will also need, unless depending on your prep beforehand, you will also need some lemons and a spice grinder for the preparation of the actual mushroom dose. We'll come back to that in a minute. As for the co-pilot, this is either the day of or before. Again, be sure that they've watched the Paul Stamets, Joe Rogan episode of Joe Rogan's podcast. Because, as I'm doing to you, you're going to tell them they'll be interacting with a vastly ancient, largely non-physical alien intelligence that explores the galaxy by interacting with the nervous system of physical organisms it finds on planet after planet. Which may sound bold at first, but, unless you actually are Paul Stamets, you do not know as much about mushrooms as Paul Stamets does. So it is likely, given if you're a listener to the show, you are the weird one. And even if they are weird adjacent or weird friendly, you're probably the weirder one. So you kind of need to be like, well, this isn't another one of my crazy hot takes. This is considered a highly credible interpretation by the actual Mushroom King. So you want to do that beforehand because you'd be surprised. I've sort of made that a mandatory requirement over the last 18 months. Year since the show came out. You would be surprised at how seriously they take it once they listen to a guy who has top secret clearance and whose hat is a mushroom saying these things. So that is either a before or the day of. If you're doing it in the evening, it's fine. They can watch it the day of. And onto fasting, which again is a day of thing, right? Terrence says 8 hours is fine, which is essentially just empty stomach. And that's correct. Like you want that so that you can actually not interfere with the dose. As you consume it. But I'm experienced with fasting, so I always do longer, and it's typically nothing the day of the procedure if you're heading into like a sunset or early evening procedure, but a minimum of 8 hours. It depends on how you roll with fasting and all the rest of it. But minimum or like essential is empty stomach, so don't eat anything for 6 to 8 hours beforehand. And that really brings you to most of the day. So just eat normally the day before, and then when you get up, just don't. You can have like tea and black coffee and whatever, and obviously water. But bearing in mind, you will like have a crazy stoned feast once you're done. So you can look forward to that. In the few hours leading up to it, again, moving back to what I consider to be a universal ritual structure, weather permitting, you want to open like the doors to the outside world, or windows if you're in an apartment, but ideally doors, as you clean the environment. So vacuuming and mopping and so on. And if you're, washing the clothing or the sheets or whatever it happens to be, you want to do that. And this is actually the Ouija tech for me. And it's frankly generally best practice for, I guess, exploratory spirit work. Whether this is just quote unquote psychological or not, there is something about actually opening doors and windows in the lead up to inviting spirits that seems to make it work better. And having a clean environment when you're inviting guests over is only polite anyway, going back to the Japanese ambassador thing. Also, you all know what it's like to be high in a dirty or cluttered environment. You feel like you're in Train Spotting. It's disgusting. You feel like, oh, I'm officially a crackhead. And so you notice all the dirt and the clutter more when you're in an altered state, so just make sure there isn't any. And while you're doing that, again, weather permitting, doors open, cleaning, and so on. And if you do, if you just can't resist a little bit of ritualization, at this point, there is nothing wrong with some incense or so on. It just makes it pleasant and whatever, right? I play Icarus, I find on YouTube while I'm cleaning, because it feels right. And it fits into the ritual model we're exploring here. Now, Icarus are both songs taught by plants to shamans that actually summon plant spirits, as well as being plant spirits themselves. And yes, it's a different corner of the Americas to the mushroom, to be sure. But if they're on YouTube, they fall into the spirits on a mission category. And they either will or will not participate based on their own demonstrated agency. So you don't need to look for, because it's a bit too much of a stretch geographically, but you don't need to find an Icaro specifically for the mushroom. just find something just find some Icarus and play them is part of that general day of procedure, right? And so that's the day of, and we'll move into, I guess, immediately before. Shower, shower or clean yourself, however you do that, and get into the clean, loose-fitting clothes. Now, it's obviously best not to put on makeup or hair product or anything else from like a chemical perspective as well. When you want to be clean, but you also want to be cleansed, right? So I guess obviously with the exception of depending on how you do dental hygiene, but don't cover yourself in petrochemicals or anything as you clean yourself, right? And put your phone somewhere out of sight in a different room to where you'll be doing the journeying. And if you have a less experienced co-pilot, trust me, hide their phone. Tell them they'll get it back when you're at the the post-journey stage. And firstly, this is because you generally want to minimize artificial EM where you'll be journeying. So don't have it, beside the bed. You shouldn't be sleeping with it beside your bed anyway, but don't have it beside the bed. But also, especially for the less experienced, this might happen to you though, especially if you're doing journeying for a particular psychological challenge, you don't want them making lovey-dovey phone calls to family members and friends or, God forbid, even colleagues in the middle of the night, which can happen, again, if they've chosen to journey on certain psychological issues to do with acceptance or forgiveness or whatever. It's just better to keep them until you get to the post-journey phase. And you also want to have a pen and paper near you where you're journeying, especially if it's on a particular issue. This doesn't happen all the time because it might just be like, oh, I totally get that. But I tend to always write something down immediately after the experience. So that's it. Like have the pen and paper and be clean and don't have the phone anywhere near you. And now, using the spice grinder, powderize each individual dose. And now you can actually if you've divvied up the dose, you can powderize it and put it into, separate containers beforehand. But if not, you use an electric spice grinder and you powderize each individual dose and put them in glasses, and then you pour some freshly squeezed lemon juice just to sort of like, not even cover it, but just to kind of make it into a bit of a gloop. Almost cover it, and mix it together. This is the moment you elect for, incidentally. It's the lemon going into the powder, the gloop. You're electing for gloop. You can, as I said, powderize the mushrooms beforehand, but elect for the gloop. This is called lemon tech, and the thinking is that the lemon juice begins the conversion process of psilocybin to psilocin, but it might just be that you're increasing the surface area of the mushroom by turning it into a powder, and thus it can come up quicker, but nevertheless it does. So you make it into a lemon gloop, and then you let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes, and you'll actually see it soak up and there. At this time, close and definitely lock the doors because you will be lying down to do the journey thing and like double confirmed to your own satisfaction that you've locked the doors because you'll be lying down doing, oh my God, did I lock the doors? And you'll get in your own way, right? And this is when you switch off the music and so on. Because there's so much kind of hurry up and wait with this process, and that's one. But you let the gloopize for 20 to 30 minutes. And then it's down the hatch. And the best way to do that is put a small amount of water. It is more disgusting. It's not that bad. You've definitely had nicer things in your mouth, but most of you have had worse things in your mouth, and you know it. It's not that bad, but because it has turned into a kind of sludge after 20 or 30 minutes, you just want to liquefy it a bit. So it's almost like more palatable the more water you put in, but it takes longer to get down the hatch. So put in enough water so that it loosens and then gulp. It's usually 1 or 2 gulps, right? And then you have enough time at this point to clean up the glasses, which I recommend you do because it looks grim when you've come back, and have some mouthwash. And then you just hang about waiting for the body high to come up. And I don't want to say like the beginnings of the visual hallucinations, but it's more like living things will look more alive and so on. And you'll know when the body high is coming up that it's time to go and lie down with the mask and the earplugs and begin. Separate rooms, same room, however you're doing it if you've got a co-pilot. And that's what I mean. There are kind of like a number of options in the alone together model. You can actually do this in the same room, even on the same bed if it's large enough and, depending who it is and whatever. But if it's the same bed or the same room, just remember that you will definitely get up multiple times to pee, because that's what happens with entheogens. And someone else getting up might disturb you a little bit, or if they move, it might bring you out of it. Usually it doesn't, and especially if they're people you're close with, it's fine. Separate rooms is better for that, but separate rooms works as long as you both absolutely promise not to disturb or check on the other one for any reason at all. Because I guarantee you'll start to wonder about them or get anxious. Or is it working for them? Are they all right? Are they done yet? I don't want them out there on their own, blah, blah, blah. This is literally why Terence says do it on your own. And there's a very good case for that. But there is a co-pilot or alone together model, and this is it. And you just have to be completely clear that under no circumstances are you going to bother the other person. You'll think about them, but your next thought will be, we promised to do that, right? So that's your call. But this is, so that's the immediately before to when you, in fact, go and lie down with your synthetic silent darkness, which is the eye mask and the earplugs. Now, the general shape of this whole process is, coming up to body high and beginnings of visual alteration, and then the actual journeying with the mask and the earplugs, and that's about an hour to 90 minutes if you're at a 5 gram to 10 gram dose. You'll know when you're done. I mean, I know this doesn't sound like it. You're like, please don't make notes and say, I'll get up within an hour to 90 minutes. It doesn't work like that. You'll know when you're done, particularly as you'll likely have received some sort of revelation, because that's what you're journeying for. And then it's under the actual fun parts of being really high, which involves the food tasting and being in nature and playing whatever music you want, or having what I suppose is technically a 3-way with a sexual partner and an alien, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes, and it varies, you'll get a second or even a third wave of less strong, but wanting to lie back down in the dark with the mask on too. Just go with it. Each time is different. But the first come up to sort of maximum high, hour to 90 minutes, you want the mask and the earplugs. And then after that, it's really up to everyone what it is they want to do. So a few tips for the actual journeying part. Basically, the mushroom delights in interacting with a consciousness that knows what it is, which is to say another conscious, animate entity. So talk to it while you're in mushroom space, obviously telepathically or, in your own mind. This is where this stuff is going on, whatever any of those words mean, right? If you're at a loss as to what to call it, I sometimes call it my beloved, which is both appropriately non-specific and appropriately goth. But interacting with it and talking to it includes teasing it. And I mean teasing it like saying, is that all you've got? Show me more, I can take it, and so on. And if you do that, particularly as you're, heading towards a peak experience, watch those self-transforming alien cathedrals kind of Rubik's Cube into something even crazier, and listen as the wind picks up in mushroom space. Mushroom space is windy. I just work here. And you'll notice that if you have the earplugs in. I don't know why that is. But the teasing really brings out the mushroom sense of humor. You will tend to giggle on these things anyway. You will giggle more if you talk to it. The experience in general actually makes you realize the universe, in fact, really is quite funny. If you're journeying on a particular issue, even not, but especially if you're journeying on a particular issue, give the mushroom permission to go through your memories and experiences and show you what you need to see. Now, you'll actually have an opportunity to do this as you are coming up towards the peak, because typically on journeys like this, after you lie down and the experience is coming up, it feels like the mushroom is sort of tesseracting through your physical and non-physical form in a way that feels very like in the movie Interstellar. And it's my impression that this is it working out who its dance partner is, and what that dance partner is going to need for this particular session. It's a fascinating experience, actually. You will also be left with the indelible impression that every single one of your memories and experiences is perfectly retained somewhere in the universe, even if you don't have recall of them in your, normal waking life. I mean, which must be the case for things like remote viewing and past life memories and even hypnotism to work. But it's quite something to experience it. So that's it for that. Like, treat it as a person when you're in that peak journey and give it permission to go through your memories. Tease it in a loving way. Don't call it schoolyard names, right? But like, tease it. You interact with it as a person, and it will interact with you, and that's kind of like the key to this part of it. And that's it. Like, it's up to you and the mushroom, really. And that's all there is to say so much about during the journey part. But then we've got to tell you the after part. When you're done, write down either the revelation or something. You may. This is not optional, although I do. And then return to your common areas, or if you're on your own, it's all common area for you. My God, resist the temptation at this point to check on your co-pilot if they are journeying in a separate room. Although, eerily enough, you'll typically find that you both emerge at the same time anyway, or more or less. It might be eerie. It might just be that's, you've had the same dose, more or less, of a molecule that affects human brains in a similar way. So whatever it is, you won't be on your own for too long if you've got someone in the other room. And then just have fun. Go outside, eat blueberries, whatever it is. But be aware when you're kind of doing that, especially as one, you'll be hungry, and two, you'll be high, that you still have the mushroom in you. And honestly, there is something about knowing that when you're eating living things that seems to be part of the delight of it. But also your taste buds are altered because you're high. So have fun. And I guess, so those are some of the main, well, that's the how, with a couple of whys, as in why would you do this, and its specific journeying to learn things, right? There are some additional whys, of course, which we'll sort of finish up on. And one is the chemical reset. Like, not for nothing is psilocybin used to treat people with severe depression. So you will notice this instantly, but you will especially notice it the next day. You will feel cleansed and cleared. Hopefully not in a Scientological sense, but that's what it's like. This even happens with very small doses, but boring. But if anxiety and depression are particular demons you grapple with, rituals such as these are something you may want to calendarize every 6 months to a year or so, 6 to 9 months, depending on your situation and your Airbnb budget if you're not doing it at home. The other guaranteed one, I guess, so there's that, is creative inspiration, which is a universal requirement, even if you, I think wrongly, think your job or whatever it is isn't creative. It's not just if you're a painter or, musician or whatever. Creativity in just normal life is a natural human function. And that's a big deal. So you'll get a chemical reset and creative inspiration. And finally, especially because it's different each time, and you're going to have to get your own dose right and so on. But eventually you will, and hopefully first time, if you take this kind of seriously, you'll really end up with some food for thought. The oddness of the experience grows rather than diminishes with subsequent rumination. As you sort of roll through different personal explanatory models in your head, like, if this is quote unquote just in my mind, then what even am that? Like, how can a dehydrated fungus, which is literally not even alive in that sense, enable these experiences? What does that say about what we consider matter? That sort of thing. So there's there's post-contact food for thought that is also quite valuable over the medium term. And yeah, I just wanted to get this information down somewhere for people. It might not be now, but it's here when you need it, if you need it. And also I kind of got some of my own thoughts about the process and the why I've cooked down to this particular system out somewhere. And probably some of you have already guessed. This whole show is the fulfillment of, a promise, or I guess payment for services rendered. Until next time.